Have you ever witnessed a moment where talent silences prejudice? A millionaire asked his black maid's 12-year-old daughter to play the piano for fun, but she was a musical prodigy. "Sophia, come here now." Robert Whitmore shouted from his Italian leather armchair, interrupting the lively conversation he was having with his millionaire guests. The 12-year-old girl was helping her mother, Carmen, serve canapés in the luxurious living room of their Beverly Hills mansion. The girl approached timidly, her hands still wet from washing dishes in the kitchen. Around her, 6 men in suits and their wives covered in jewelry watched her with that look she knew so well. A mixture of curiosity and disdain. "My friends are bored," Robert declared with a cruel smile, gesturing toward the Steinway grand piano that dominated the corner of the room. "How about entertaining us a little? I understand your mother said you play the piano." Victoria Whitmore, the millionaire's 16-year-old daughter, giggled maliciously from the sofa. "Daddy, she can barely read. How is she going to play the piano?" The guests chuckled, approving the joke. Sophia felt the heat rise to her neck, but she maintained the upright posture her mother had always taught her. Carmen appeared at the kitchen door, her face tense with worry, but she didn't dare intervene. She knew very well where her place was in that house. "Come on, girl," Robert insisted, clapping his hands impatiently. "Play something simple. Maybe Happy Birthday. My friends will love to see how hard you try." What those millionaires didn't know was that Sophia had woken up at 5 every morning for the past 8 years to practice on the piano in the abandoned church 6 blocks away where Father Martinez let her in before work. Her small, calloused hands weren't just from helping her mother clean. Get ready, because this story is about to take a turn you won't believe. Sophia walked slowly to the piano, her worn sneakers making noise on the immaculate marble. She sat down on the padded bench and adjusted the height, ignoring the condescending whispers behind her. Robert crossed his arms, already anticipating the cheap entertainment he would get from the girl's failure. Victoria recorded everything on her cell phone, eager to post it on social media later. For a moment, Sophia hesitated with her hands on the keys. Then something changed in her eyes, a silent determination that only exists in those who carry secrets too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If you've ever witnessed the exact moment when someone who has been underestimated is about to silence all their critics, then you know that the silence before the storm always carries a special energy. Don't forget to subscribe to the Black Voices channel to find out how a 12-year-old girl turns humiliation into something those millionaires would never forget. The keys of the Steinway gleamed under the light of the crystal chandelier as Sophia adjusted her posture on the bench. Robert Whitmore picked up his $1,000 glass of red wine and leaned back in his armchair, clearly enjoying what he considered a domestic charity spectacle. Everyone's silence, Robert announced theatrically to his guests. "Let's see if the taxes I pay for these public schools were worth anything." The laughter that followed echoed through the room like the sound of crystal shattering. Victoria pointed her cell phone at Sophia, already imagining the likes she would get on Instagram with a video of the little maid trying to play the piano. $250,000, Robert corrected proudly. "But who's counting, right?" As the guests continued their cruel jokes, Carmen closed her eyes at the kitchen door. She knew her daughter was about to make a decision that would change their lives forever. Sophia could play something simple, remain invisible, and preserve their jobs. Or, Sophia took a deep breath, her hands positioning themselves on the keys with a precision that did not go unnoticed by Carmen. It was the same posture she herself had taught years ago when she still believed that talent was enough to open doors in this country. "I hope you like Chopin," Sophia said calmly, her fingers finally touching the first keys. The silence that followed was not the polite silence of expectation. It was the absolute silence of people who had just realized they had catastrophically underestimated something, but didn't yet know exactly what. And in Sophia's eyes, for the first time that night, there was a sparkle that made even Robert Whitmore shift uncomfortably in his Italian leather armchair. The first notes of Chopin came out of the Steinway with a delicacy that made Robert frown. It wasn't the out-of-tune, hesitant sound he had expected from a girl from the suburbs. It was precise, technically correct, but it was still nothing to impress him. "Well, at least she knows where the keys are," Charles Morrison muttered to Margaret Steinberg. Both of them still chuckling. Victoria continued recording, already imagining the ironic caption she would post. Prepare yourself for an incredible twist that will leave you speechless. Sophia continued playing the nocturne in E-flat major, her small hands navigating the keys with a familiarity that began to catch his attention. Robert leaned forward slightly, confused. The technique was surprisingly good. Not perfect, but definitely beyond what he expected from someone who learned in public school. What Robert didn't know was that Sophia had spent the last 8 years waking up at 5 in the morning, walking 6 blocks in the cold of Beverly Hills to St. Michael's Church. Father Martinez, an old Colombian who had been a conservatory pianist in Bogota before immigrating, recognized the girl's raw talent the first day she showed up, asking to just play a little, please. As Sophia reached the first climax of the piece, something changed in the atmosphere of the room. The guests stopped talking. The sound coming from the piano was no longer just technically competent. It had soul. There was interpretation. There were years of pain, hope, and quiet dedication flowing through every note. Carmen watched from the kitchen doorway, tears beginning to form in her eyes. She recognized every nuance of that performance because she was the one who first placed Sophia's hands on the keys when the girl was only 4 years old. Carmen had been the first violinist in the Medellin Symphony Orchestra before fleeing the violence that consumed her hometown. Robert began to shift uncomfortably in his chair. The music was beautiful, more than beautiful. It was moving, and that wasn't part of the plan. He wanted entertainment, not art. He wanted confirmation of his superiority, not questions about her. That was when the front door opened and someone walked in who would change everything. Dr. Patricia Williams, music critic for the Los Angeles Times and a personal friend of Robert's, had arrived early for the dinner that would follow the cocktails. She stopped in the foyer, frozen by the sound coming from the main room. Patricia had spent 40 years of her life immersed in classical music. She had heard the world's greatest virtuosos from concert halls in Vienna to conservatories in Moscow. And what she was hearing now coming from the Whitmore living room was undeniably extraordinary. Without making a sound, she approached the entrance to the room and watched the scene unfold. A 12-year-old black girl, clearly from a humble background, performing Chopin with an interpretive maturity that rivaled professional pianists. "My God," Patricia whispered to herself, recognizing immediately that she was witnessing something rare. Meanwhile, Victoria had stopped recording. The mocking smile disappeared from her face when she realized that something was different. The adults were no longer laughing. They were listening. Really listening. And some seemed genuinely impressed. "Daddy," she whispered to Robert, "how much longer is she going to play?" Robert didn't answer. For the first time in his adult life, he was being forced to confront the possibility that he had catastrophically underestimated someone. The music coming from the piano wasn't just good, it was exceptional, and it was coming from a source that his prejudice had categorized as impossible. Sophia was nearing the end of the nocturne, her hands dancing across the keys with a confidence that grew with each bar. She could feel the change in the atmosphere. She could sense that she had earned the audience's genuine attention. But what they didn't know was that Chopin was just the warm-up. Father Martinez had taught her something fundamental. When people try to diminish you, piss on them. You don't just show them you're competent. You show them you're extraordinary. And Sophia had saved her true extraordinary talent for the right moment. Because after Chopin, she planned to play her own composition, a piece she had created, inspired by the tears she saw her mother shed every night, the humiliations they endured daily, and the stubborn hope that refused to die despite everything. When the last notes of the nocturne echoed through the room and silence fell, Sophia took a deep breath and looked directly at Robert Whitmore. His eyes no longer carried the shyness of the girl who had been volunteered to play. They carried the quiet determination of someone who was about to rewrite all the rules of the game. "That was the easy part," Sophia said calmly, adjusting her posture on the bench. "Now I'm going to play something I composed with you in mind." The first notes of Sophia's original composition echoed through the room like a silent earthquake. It wasn't Chopin. It wasn't anything those millionaires had ever heard before. It was something completely new, born of pain, humiliation, and the stubborn hope of a girl who had spent years being invisible. The melody began softly, almost whispered, like Carmen's footsteps through the mansion's corridors before dawn. Then it grew, incorporating rhythms reminiscent of the heartbeat of a mother who works 16 hours a day to support her daughter. Sophia's fingers danced across the keys with a precision that drew Dr. Patricia Williams closer to the entrance of the room. "My God," Patricia whispered, discreetly pulling out her cell phone to record. In 40 years as a music critic, she had rarely witnessed such compositional maturity in someone so young. Robert Whitmore had stopped drinking his wine. The liquid remained suspended in the air as he tried to process what he was hearing. This wasn't just music. It was a complete narrative, a symphony of experiences he could never fully understand, but which touched him in an inexplicable way. Victoria slowly lowered her cell phone. The video she had planned to post mocking the little maid now showed something completely different. It showed an artist, a true artist, performing an original masterpiece, while she, with her years of expensive private lessons, could barely play Fur Elise without making a mistake. The composition evolved into a more complex movement where Sophia incorporated techniques she had secretly learned from Father Martinez. Jazz harmonies superimposed on a classical structure, creating something unique that spoke directly to the soul of the listener. Carmen had approached the kitchen door, tears streaming down her face. She recognized every note, every pause, every crescendo. That song told their story. Mother and daughter fighting against a world that insisted on diminishing them. Charles Morrison had stopped mid-sip of whiskey. Margaret Steinberg held her breath. The other guests were completely mesmerized by what they were witnessing. It wasn't possible. A 12-year-old girl from the suburbs couldn't be playing with such mastery. Then Sophia took the music to a level none of them were prepared to hear. Her small hands executed a passage of speed and technical complexity that rivaled the world's greatest virtuosos. The $250,000 Steinway was finally being played by someone worthy of its potential. Dr. Patricia Williams entered the room completely, not caring about social etiquette. "Robert," she whispered urgently. "Do you know who that girl is?" She's my maid's daughter," Robert replied, his voice sounding strange and distant. "Robert, I need to talk to her immediately. What we're hearing, it's extraordinary. This girl has a talent that comes once in a generation." The climax of the composition came like an emotional storm. Sophia channeled years of silent humiliation, of dreams whispered in the dark, of waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to practice on an out-of-tune piano. Each note carried the weight of injustice and the strength of resistance. Victoria realized with growing horror that she was the one who had insisted that Sophia play. She was the one who had recorded everything, inadvertently documenting her own embarrassment. When Sophia executed the final movement, a passage that incorporated elements of Colombian classical music that Carmen had taught her in secret, the emotion in the room was palpable. There was something deeply unfair happening there, and everyone knew it. Robert Whitmore, accustomed to being the most important person in any room, found himself completely diminished by a girl he had treated as cheap entertainment. Worse, he had done so in front of Dr. Patricia Williams, one of the most respected music critics on the West Coast. The last notes of the composition echoed through the room like a final judgment. The silence that followed was absolute. Not the polite silence of expectation, but the stunned silence of people who had just witnessed something that completely defied their worldviews. Dr. Patricia Williams was the first to break the silence, initiating a slow, reverent round of applause. "Extraordinary," she said, her voice heavy with professional and personal emotion. "Absolutely extraordinary." Sophia remained seated at the piano, her small hands still on the keys, staring directly at Robert Whitmore. There was no arrogant triumph in her eyes. Only the quiet dignity of someone who had just proven a fundamental point about human value and hasty judgments. "That song," Sophia said quietly, "is called Invisible. I wrote it thinking about all the people you see every day but choose not to really see." Robert swallowed hard, finally understanding the full extent of his ignorance. He had treated a genuine musical prodigy as domestic entertainment. Worse, he had done so deliberately to humiliate her. Carmen approached her daughter for the first time without asking permission. Unconcerned with class protocols, she placed her hand on Sophia's shoulder with a pride she could no longer hide. Victoria looked down at the cell phone in her hands, realizing she had recorded her own public humiliation. The video clearly showed her initial cruelty and subsequent transformation from mockery to forced admiration. If this were shared, and she knew it would be, her social reputation would be destroyed. But what none of them knew yet was that Dr. Patricia Williams had recognized something more than just exceptional talent in Sophia's performance. She had recognized the musical signature of someone she knew very well, Carmen Morales, former first violinist of the Medellin Symphony Orchestra, who had mysteriously disappeared from the international music scene 15 years ago. As the guests slowly began to process what they had witnessed, Patricia approached Carmen with an expression that promised that the night was only just beginning to reveal its deepest secrets. "Carmen Morales," said Dr. Patricia Williams, approaching Sophia's mother with eyes shining with recognition. "First violinist of the Medellin Symphony Orchestra. She disappeared from the music scene 15 years ago after receiving the Latin Award for Musical Excellence." The silence in the room became deafening. Robert Whitmore, who had earlier discovered that he had been treating a musical prodigy as domestic entertainment, now faced an even more devastating reality. His housekeeper was one of the most respected musicians in Latin America. Carmen lifted her chin for the first time in 15 years of silent servitude. "Dr. Williams," she replied with the dignity she had buried to survive. "It is an honor to see you again." "You know her," Robert stammered, his arrogance evaporating quickly. Patricia turned to him with a look that could freeze hell. "Robert, you had one of the greatest musicians in the hemisphere cleaning your toilets for 15 years. And your daughter, one of the most promising prodigies I've ever seen, serving your canapés." Victoria, still holding the cell phone that had documented her own social downfall, watched in horror as her privileged life crumbled in real time. The video she had recorded mocking Sophia now showed a 12-year-old girl performing music with a mastery she would never achieve after years of expensive private lessons. I didn't know," Robert whispered, finally realizing the catastrophic extent of his ignorance. "Of course you didn't," Patricia replied contemptuously. "People like you never do. They see uniforms instead of people, accents instead of stories, origins instead of talent." Dr. Patricia Williams wasted no time. The next morning, she published a devastating article in the Los Angeles Times titled "The Symphony of Invisibility: How the Beverly Hills Elite Wastes Genius." The article detailed not only Sophia's extraordinary talent, but also the criminal negligence of a society that allows people like Carmen Morales to clean bathrooms instead of conducting orchestras. Victoria's video spread across social media like wildfire, but not in the way she had planned. #Privilegiedjurljetsold went viral, racking up 15 million views in 48 hours. The comments were relentless. Imagine paying thousands for piano lessons and being humiliated by a 12-year-old girl. That's the difference between privilege and real talent. Arrogance being shattered live on air. Robert tried to control the damage by hiring an elite public relations firm, but it was too late. The Los Angeles Symphony Orchestra offered Carmen a position as assistant conductor. The Curtis Institute of Music offered Sophia a full scholarship, including room and board. 3 record labels fought for the rights to record the composition Invisible. Victoria, unable to cope with the public humiliation, was admitted to a rehabilitation clinic for nervous exhaustion, the elite's euphemism for mental breakdown caused by shame. His high society friends quickly abandoned him, fearing association with the scandal. Her social media accounts, once filled with praise and envy, were now bombarded with comments about her prejudice and arrogance. Robert lost $3 million contracts when his business partners distanced themselves from the man who had a musical genius cleaning his house. His reputation in Beverly Hills was ruined. Ironically, the man who had treated Sophia like cheap entertainment turned out to be the real clown in the situation. 6 months later, Sophia made her debut at Walt Disney Concert Hall, performing her composition, Invisible, with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, conducted by her mother, Carmen, who had triumphantly resumed her musical career. The performance was broadcast nationally and raised $2 million for a music scholarship fund for underprivileged children. In the audience, Robert Whitmore watched from one of the cheapest seats, all he could afford after his financial empire began to crumble. He had tried to sue Patricia Williams for defamation, but found that every word of her article was legally sound. At his side, his wife served him divorce papers, tired of being married to the national symbol of blind privilege and arrogance. Meanwhile, Carmen and Sophia now lived in a comfortable home in Pasadena, far from the Beverly Hills mansions where they had been invisible for so long. Sophia practiced daily on the Steinway they had bought, not stolen or borrowed, but legitimately purchased with the money from her first recording contract. During the performance at Disney Concert Hall, when Sophia played the final movement of Invisible, she glanced briefly at the audience and met Robert's eyes. There was no anger there, just the quiet dignity of someone who had turned humiliation into triumph. The lesson was crystal clear. Robert had tried to use Sophia as cheap entertainment to impress his rich friends. Instead, she used her own talent to show the whole world who really deserved to be invisible. True justice was not destroying Robert Whitmore. It was building something magnificent that he could never understand or achieve. While he languished in the social irrelevance he had tried to impose on others, Sophia and Carmen built a musical legacy that would inspire generations. Today, 5 years later, Sophia is considered one of the most promising young composers in the United States. Carmen runs the Los Angeles Youth Orchestra, providing free musical opportunities to children from underserved communities. Victoria still lives in seclusion, her social media career permanently destroyed by the video she recorded herself. And Robert, well, he finally learned the true meaning of the word invisible. It's not about being ignored, but about being irrelevant. The difference is that Sophia chose her invisibility as a strategy. He earned his as a consequence. If this story touched your heart and showed you that real talent knows no zip code or skin color, subscribe to the Black Voices channel for more stories that prove that underestimating the right people can be the most expensive mistake you ever